Greetings, Montana, and hello, world. Chris Hislop again from the Montana World Affairs Council. Welcome to another session of our Academic World Quest Prep Series. In this series, we're discussing a number of key issues with international experts from the U.S. Department of State. If you don't know about Academic World Quest, it's our flagship international education program that brings over 400 of Montana's best and brightest high school kids to the University of Montana campus each March to engage with diplomats, consuls general, authors, and thought leaders on key international issues of the day. Academic World Quest then culminates with a knowledge competition where teams of 4 students vie to win the grand prize and represent Montana at the national competition in Washington, D.C. in April. So let me start by thanking our very generous sponsors. This is the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation, Clearwater Credit Union, First Interstate Bank, and Humanities Montana, who help us bring this and so many more programs to you. Before I introduce our guests, I would like to show a very short video from the United States Department of State. So I'm a bit hit and miss on this one. Stand by while I see if I can make it happen. One moment.
It's a wonderful and complex world out there, filled with challenges and opportunities. That's why America's diplomats with the U.S. Department of State are on the job every day, representing you. We are advancing America's foreign policy interests by uniting our allies, confronting our adversaries, and protecting our citizens. We advance democracy, human rights, global health, and more. We grow markets that create American jobs. We are America's first federal agency, and we're in 190 countries and over 270 U.S. embassies and consulates serving you. We are the United States Department of State.
Okay, very good. So now let me please introduce our distinguished guest for this session. Dan Oates represents the United States on digital economy and information and communication technology policy in multilateral fora. He and his team lead digital policy engagement in the G7, G20, OECD, APEC, Global Partnership on AI, and other venues, and support engagement in the International Telecommunications Union and the United Nations. Dan, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Chris.
Well, it's really great to have you, and we've already spoken with a number of your U.S. Department of State colleagues on a number of really fascinating key issues. And I have to say, in more than one of those sessions, AI has come up separately, and not surprisingly, because it is really taking up a lot of our interest, a lot of our bandwidth, excuse the pun, and we're all trying to understand a little bit more about what is it and how might it impact us and our global workforce. So Dan, maybe over to you for your perspectives on this issue.
Sure. And let me just share my screen really quick. So I'm coming at this from the State Department, as noted, but really wanted to tell a little bit more of a story on artificial intelligence and how we're thinking about it in the world today. First, I'll just say, it's happy to be with you all. I had the good opportunity to visit Montana, although I'm originally from Florida myself. Back about 10 years ago, visited to Gardner, Butte, and Ennis. I know it's probably not a little colder than right now than it was when I visited over the summer, but have some fond memories of being out there. So just really starting out, kind of the State Department and AI. Why are we focused on this? Why is it important? We're really focused on this because it's at the center of the global technological revolution. Advances in AI present opportunities and challenges, and the US needs to work together with our partners and allies to further science and technology, to promote democracy and human rights, and to be able to seize the opportunities of this technology while promoting shared norms and agreements on responsible use. So, I could spend probably an hour talking about what is AI. Here's a couple of answers from ChatGPT and from Claude, which is Anthropic's AI system. But I think really the takeaway or the main point, because I think most folks who are watching this probably have some baseline, is that AI isn't one thing. It's really a constellation of different technologies that have different use cases in different sectors. And so thinking about how we address from a policy and governance perspective what that is. But by way of a little bit of background, I started working on tech policy in the State Department 10 years ago, back in 2013. Initially, I was very focused on our bilateral affairs with East Asia on tech policy, working on issues like data governance, privacy, cloud computing, spectrum. And over the last 10 years, I've had the opportunity to travel to over 20 countries, 8 states, and Guam. So that's, bringing a little bit of Guam to this conversation too. But really the conversation on AI governance in the international space, from my perspective, started back in 2016. And that was at the G7 ICT ministers meeting that was held in Takamatsu, Japan. This was the first reconvening of G7 ministers in quite some time. And since 2016, they've met every year, which I think really reflects the utility of some of these conversations. I put that as the starting point. Japan really pushed forward, and a number of countries came together to support a conference on AI at the OECD later in 2016, which was fascinating and one of the really first places where a very broad group of countries were coming together to talk about these topics and understand it. And there were a number of great speakers, but one there that stuck out to me that was probably most provocative was asking questions around, how many people were going to die because we don't adopt AI fast enough. And I think 2016 was also a time when machine learning advances were really underway. So fast forwarding in 2017, the G7 again took up discussions on AI. This ministerial was held in a UNESCO World Heritage Site in the Palace. But really the G7 that year noted the need for updated, open, informed dialogue with stakeholders to raise awareness, and particularly highlighted the need for a human-centric approach to AI. So not only focusing on the technology, but how AI and people are working together to have better outcomes. Going into 2018, I wanted to give a little bit of a case study of an experience I had at the International Telecommunication Union. They held their Plenipotentiary Conference in Dubai in 2018. And the key issues in the negotiation around a resolution on artificial intelligence were really about what the scope and mandate of what the ITU should do on AI. With some viewing a quite broad mandate for the ITU to take on work on AI, and others wanting to focus the discussion a lot more on telecommunication services and technologies. And I just want to give you a sense of what some of these meetings look like. What does diplomacy actually look like on the ground, rather than just all the talking points and websites that you might be able to look at? So, our delegation to this meeting had well over 100 people from a whole retinue of U.S. government agencies, but also from the U.S. private sector, representing on a whole host of issues. There are, vastly, this conference, and to call it a conference is kind of wrong because it's more of a negotiation, but it lasts for 3 weeks. And so there's, dozens of concurrent meetings ongoing at any given time. But I was really there in 2018 to focus on AI. And you might ask, well, what does a negotiation look like? And sometimes it looks like 193 countries in a room looking at a Word document with track changes. and figuring out, well, what do we want to say? What can we find consensus on? What is it that the world is going to have come out of that? Very often it's in a much smaller room, and how you're able to find consensus. And this was the ad hoc group that was really driving work on this resolution at the point that we thought that we had reached a consensus, and we're going to finalize a text. Over the so you can see everyone's very happy. Over the intervening days, we found that the agreement we thought we'd reached wasn't really there. And so we had more small conversations in big rooms, and we had small conversations in small rooms, and we had one-on-one conversations in big rooms. And so, I think just stressing that there's a lot of dialogue that's needed with a lot of different partners in order to be able to find consensus. And at the end of 3 weeks, after over 60 hours of negotiation, we actually ended up without any resolution on AI in the International Telecommunication Union. So I came home and said, nothing happened at the end of that. But it's important to remember that despite the fact that we weren't able to come to an agreement, that we remained friends, and that we continue to work together to advance policy and discussion in this area. So kind of the epilogue on that is that 4 years later at the Plenipotentiary Conference in 2022, we did pass a resolution on AI. But this time it was coming into a different time in the ecosystem. So, AI had developed considerably between 2018 and 2022. For example, UNESCO had developed a recommendation on the ethics of AI, and there was a lot more maturity in terms of what AI technologies are and how we could take it on. So, obviously, a little company called OpenAI released ChatGPT in late 2022, and I think that's kind of changed what people are thinking about in terms of AI. Moving forward into kind of what this administration has done, I think there's been a real recognition that President Biden has been clear we need to take bold action to harness the benefits and mitigate the risks of AI. And they've acted decisively to protect safety and rights in the age of AI so everyone can benefit. There's a lot of actions, including the AI Bill of Rights, or the Blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights, the NIST AI Risk Management Framework. The White House worked with companies to secure voluntary commitments to help move towards safe, secure, trustworthy development of AI. As well as things like the National AI R&D Strategic Plan and the National AI Research Roadmap. I won't go into all of these, but there's a great website that's very easy to remember called ai.gov that has vastly more information and where you can access all of these documents. The real question isn't just what we're doing at home, though. It's also how are we engaged internationally? And again, I won't try to cover everything that we're doing across the globe. But I will say that almost every international organization is trying to meet the AI moment and figure out how are we responding, how are we working towards the AI future that we want. And my focus, because of where I sit, will be mostly on the multilateral system. But there are obviously many domestic initiatives, including the EU AI Act, which is actually in their final trilogue right now as we speak in Brussels. And China's just released a new initiative that's the Global AI Governance Initiative. So there's a lot of interest internationally. So I'll just touch on a couple of these, but happy to go into more depth as helpful. Within the UN system, the UN Secretary General has said that they're going to negotiate a global digital compact at a summit for the future that will take place next year. They've established a high-level advisory board on AI that will develop an interim report by the end of 2023 with a final report by next year. As I noted, UNESCO developed a recommendation on the ethics of AI, and also notably, the US rejoined UNESCO as part of our recommitment to multilateralism. Within the ITU, as I noted, in 2022, we did finalize a resolution on AI, and the ITU also helps convene other UN agencies as part of a global convening focused on AI for good and how we can accelerate progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. There's also work underway in Again, more than 40 UN agencies, so I won't go through them all, but within WIPO, there's also a lot of conversations around intellectual property and AI, and we also discussed in depth at the Internet Governance Forum this past October. Aside from the UN processes, the G7 has made notable progress. This year, the G7 leaders created a Hiroshima AI process to have in-depth discussions on advanced AI systems. G7 digital ministers met several times this year, both in person and virtually, and released a several deliverables, most notably a code of conduct for organizations developing advanced AI systems, which is really one of the most in-depth documents of its kind in a multilateral nature, and really reflects, a lot of the things that were in the voluntary commitments that the White House had worked on. Folks may have also seen that the UK held an AI safety summit in early November that was focused on safety risks associated with frontier AI. This, again, alongside the G7 efforts, is really, stepping up to the moment of bringing the world together to talk about some of these challenges, talk about governance. What do we need to do? What are the steps that we need to take? And I'll encourage you to read the Bletchley Declaration, as well as the creation of the AI Safety Institutes and Vice President Harris's remarks on the sidelines of the Bletchley Summit. And then, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the OECD and their work on AI, which, as I noted, started way back before maybe the ChatGPT moment. In 2019, the OECD developed the first set of intergovernmental principles in AI, and those are really still today the cornerstone for our AI policy and governance discussions. Again, their website is pretty easy to remember if you go to oecd.ai, but there's a lot of work underway, particularly within the Working Party on AI governance, in terms of how we're bringing together a broad set of like-minded countries to talk about AI and the future. And just to show what the recommendation looks like, this is the 5 value-based principles and 5 recommendations for policymakers. So you can see that. In closing, I'll highlight a very small program, but I think that has outsized impact in terms of AI Connect. Is a program the State Department really started to help empower countries to participate in the global multi-stakeholder conversation. So with a lot of these discussions ongoing in the G7 and the OECD, we really see a need to make sure that developing and emerging economies are able to take part in this conversation. So AI Connect really works with the Atlantic Council's Geotech Center to help hold monthly webinars, to work in-person regional workshops and site visits, and to support travel funding for those people in these cohorts to attend global AI conferences. So that's where I'll stop and turn it back over to Chris for any questions. And excited to be with you guys.
Dan, thank you so much for your perspective. I really appreciate all of that. I wonder if you could stop your screen share, and then we can see who else is out there. I did note we had a few schools and some community members. I'm going to remind them that you're welcome to chat in your questions to me or to the group. You can, raise your digital hand or do as you wish in order to engage directly with this international expert on AI. Now, Dan, just a couple comments from my side before opening it up. First is to thank you very kindly for bringing Guam into the conversation. We definitely don't get enough of that, especially this time of year in Montana where it's gray and cold. So much obliged. I also really, I found it very interesting, your pictures about the negotiations. And you're right, we don't often see or know the kind of day-to-day work of American diplomats in the U.S. State Department, some of which is exactly that, working together in large fora to try to hammer out international agreements. So really interesting there. And then finally, and in full transparency, I will say, I love doing these webcasts because it gives me a chance to learn about issues and dig in, and then I create these questions. However, in this case, I thought, okay, I'm going to ask ChatGPT to write some very clever questions. So I do have a list of questions that again, in transparency, are not my own, but I do see our friends at Gallatin High School in Bozeman, Montana, are online with Mr. Logan Oates. So, Logan, if you have any questions, please chat them in. In the meantime, let's see what ChatGPT has come up with for Dan. Again, not my questions here, but from our friends at ChatGPT, the prompt being, please give me 5 interesting questions on AI and the global workforce. Question 1. Dan, to you, as AI technologies continue to advance, how can global leaders ensure that the integration of AI in the workforce is done in a way that promotes job creation rather than displacement and fosters equitable opportunities for workers across different regions?
Sure. I think there's a lot of issues in that question, but I would say, really the focus going back to 2017 in thinking about AI not as something that will displace people, but that how people can leverage AI to do more or to do better. So I think just that outlook and framing of how we approach the question is important. So it's not about kind of automating away jobs, but also about how to make people more efficient. And I think you've seen this with a number of firms and how they're approaching it as well. That we're trying to see how we can use this to empower. I think even the name of Microsoft's new tool of Copilot is a good framing of thinking about how this will work. I also think just the skills question is really important for the workforce because AI, there's a lot of people who are working at building AI systems, but beyond just the people who are developing the advanced large language models, this is something that everyone will need to understand how to interact with, how to understand how it can help them in terms of the things that they're trying to do. So, there's one way of viewing the workforce as, how do you develop the best AI advanced systems? And the other question is, how do you actually utilize the AI effectively within different sectors, within different areas, whether that's in finance, in health, in environment, and anything else. So I think those are aspects to think about and are probably trying to broaden the way that you think about AI in the workforce, because AI is something that is going to affect and impact everything. And so not only viewing it in the narrow lens of the actual development of AI systems, but in how they're used most appropriately.
Dan, we've got a question from our friends at Gallatin High School, presumably from them and not from ChatGPT. It says, you mentioned that one of the questions asked at the conference was, quote, how many people will die if we adopt AI too slowly? Question is, could you say more about that, specifically the role of AI in the global South?
Sure. I will say again, this wasn't my point or my position, but was a provocative statement said by someone else at the meeting. So, but I think going back to 2016, in that moment, I think people still saw both in terms of healthcare applications, how many waiting to use AI in order to do better health scans for finding cancer or doing radiological testing. The thinking about driverless cars, and I think this question was probably more salient in 2016 than it is now, in terms of well, how many Americans die every year in car accidents, right? It's kind of a lot with human drivers, and so I think the question that the speaker was trying to convey is, if we have driverless cars and there's many people who die in driverless cars, but that's fewer than die from human drivers, then that's probably still an improvement. And so, we shouldn't be thinking or treating, technologies as compared with, zero but comparing to what the baseline is, which is humans doing all of these things.
Thanks for that, Dan. I'm going to go off of my Chat GPT script for a second and just say that the recent New Yorker issue was entirely about AI, and there was some really interesting articles. And I add to that the whole media kerfuffle around Sam Altman, the head of OpenAI. And in both in the article about Jeffrey Hinton, the kind of so-called father of AI, and Sam Altman, the former and once again current head of OpenAI, there's a spectrum of we're afraid of this stuff and we don't know what it's going to do, to let's look at the positive side and let's see how we can leverage AI to support, as you say, this human AI connection. I'm not going to ask you where you fall on that, but I am asking you, like, how can we understand that question in kind of layperson's terms, so we can have a good perspective on the current status of AI and its effect on humanity?
Yeah, I think it's not an either or, it's a both, right? And so I think we need to be taking steps to kind of assure safety, security, and trust in AI systems, but we also need to be taking steps to promote and implement those systems themselves. So it's not only about what possible challenges they may arise, but it's also about how do we leverage the opportunities.
Okay. I'm going to go back now to the Chat GPT, but I'm going to alter it a little bit, like one is supposed to do, try to get some feedback and then use it in different ways. But yesterday we did speak with some of your colleagues on the digital divide, on a number of other related issues. But because we were talking about the global South again, and when we talk about the digital divide in AI and we look at, technologically advanced countries in North America, Western Europe, for example, and then the comparatively lower technological development in the global South, is there a digital divide vis-a-vis AI right now? And what steps are being taken to deal with that?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's something we're committed to reducing, or making more narrow, so that people can leverage AI everywhere. A lot of AI also depends just on connectivity, right? So as you say, I think only during the pandemic did half of the world become connected to the internet. So thinking about how, not just in terms of AI, but the broader connectivity questions of how we ensure that there's not a digital divide more broadly. I think a few things that I'd highlight. I noted the AI Connect, but again, that's a small program. I would think back this September, on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, Secretary Blinken led an event that was really focused on how to accelerate AI in support of the Sustainable Development Goals. And the U.S. there committed $15 million towards work towards those ends, which is supporting again efforts in that space. I think there's a lot more to come in this area as different people are grappling with AI policy and regulation, skills and capacity building. But I think a lot of our traditional programming that supports connectivity, that supports kind of ICT skills, is really helpful to help build a baseline and ensure that everybody is able to leverage and benefit from these technologies. Because we want a world where people are able to use these technologies and are able to benefit. And so working with partners, working with donor organizations like foundations, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, et cetera, in order to see how do we work and build a responsible AI future that is really relevant and can benefit everyone.
We have time for one last question, again from Gallatin High School. This is to paraphrase Elon Musk recently said, "No matter what laws and codes of ethics we make to control AI, we will be too slow. AI will have already overcome whatever controls and legal framework we have, Given how slowly ideas percolate human systems and how rapidly AI is developing. Kind of end paraphrase. Question is he right?
I think the question I would ask is, what is the challenge that you're trying to solve? Right? So I think there's already in AI systems a lot of challenges that AI causes that we can address through policy and legislation and fix. Right? Like this isn't. I think the key point I would make is another one I heard from someone else, but I like repeating it. AI is not the protagonist in this story, right? We are the people, it is people who are building AI systems. And so thinking about what are the steps that we want to take? What are the safeguards that we want to put on AI systems? But this isn't, AI is not unilaterally, I mean, there are AIs that are writing other AIs, but in general, even the most advanced AI systems are being developed by people and so, this is something where we do have a say in what does this look like. I do think there's, reasonable concern that, can policy and regulation keep up with the scope of technology? But that's not a new concern, right? So I think there's a great example of, when automobiles were first introduced, people said, hey, those things are dangerous and go way too fast. So we need to regulate this, and they had people walk in front of the automobile to let people know that it was coming, which probably not the best way to make effective use of that new technology. So I think it's a reasonable question, but I think the work that we've done in the G7 in particular has been helpful to show that like-minded democracies can come together to try to be responsive to some of these questions for our citizens, and that we're trying to make the system work. But I think it's really the question boils down to what is the problem that you're trying to solve, and I think that again, an AI is not one thing, and so there's a lot of different challenges, and so whether or not that's right or wrong probably depends on what's the problem that you're actually trying to address.
Dan, thank you so much for sharing your experience and your perspective on this really key issue for all of humanity, but importantly for you academic world questers out there who are preparing for March. If you didn't see our other sessions with Dan's colleagues from the U.S. Department of State, check it out on YouTube. These are great opportunities for you to get a leg up on the competition come March. Let me quickly thank the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation, Clearwater Credit Union, First Interstate Bank, and Humanities Montana, who help us bring this and so many more programs to you. We have one more to go this afternoon. But Dan, really, once again, thanks for taking time out of your schedule to talk with us and to Montana students on this very important issue. I wish you all well. Have a good day. Bye-bye.